So, welcome everyone. I'm Hannah. I'm the Assistant Director at the Blue Hill Library. Thanks to you all for coming out this gray afternoon, staying in, joining us remotely. And we are very excited today to have Butler Smythe here to speak about sort of broadband, the state of broadband around our peninsula and the state. Butler works with a group called the Peninsula Utility for Broadband, which I'm sure he'll be able to tell us a little bit more about. And he's going to share some information about sort of current local and statewide efforts and what we can do, especially now as we're all in this Zoom life that we're sharing together to improve access for our community. So Butler, I'll hand it over to you and just let me know when you want me to start sharing those slides.
Okay, why don't you just share the first one first, and then I'll say next as we go through.
Great, sounds good.
Perfect. Okay. Need me to go?
Go for it.
Okay, right. First of all, my name is Butler Smythe, and what I'm going to do in the next 30 minutes is talk a little bit about broadband, a little bit about myself initially, but broadband locally, what is happening in the local area, and some upcoming events. I'm going to try to do that in 30 minutes. We'll hold the last 30 minutes for questions and answers. And if anybody has any questions and answers after this is done, my contact information, which shows up on the second slide, as well as the last slide, you can contact me and I will be more than happy to answer any questions you have. So why don't we start with the next slide?
Great.
So Butler Smythe, I am a retired naval officer. I was in aviation. After I retired back in 1998, I supported both Goddard Space Flight Center as a safety engineer, that's NASA, and then I also worked at Patuxent River Naval Air Station for an entity called NavAir, supporting the aircraft I used to fly in as well as its replacement aircraft. If you want to know anything more, I'm more than happy to send you my my specs, if you will. So a group that was started about 4 years ago is called the Peninsula Utility for Broadband, and the mission statement follows. It's available on our website as well. But the big thing about it, it's advocating, and I use that keyword as advocate, for fast, flexible, affordable, and reliable internet for basically all the areas that are most important to Maine and the country in general, incentivizing business, supporting schools, et cetera, and especially as it affects us today with COVID and people having to work from home, working remotely, kids in school, et cetera, and telehealth, telemedicine type of efforts. We've found that working as a group for common solutions is very beneficial because you can share information. You can also learn from what other people have done, what doesn't work as well too. So that's something that's good about working with a group. The group that we've been working very closely with is Island Institute. There's a link to it there, and we may talk about that a little bit later. But I highly recommend going to that website, and it'll give you even more information about broadband in the area and what Island Institute is doing and some of the concerns for Maine in general. My email follows, as well as the link to Peninsula Utility for Broadband. Next. So my goal is to ensure everybody learns something, including me. Hopefully people will ask questions and I learn from those sorts of things. Hopefully it educates and informs folks as well too. I will try to answer any and all questions I can online, but can do that via email or otherwise, separate from this presentation. I don't want to overwhelm folks with technical information. I also don't want to get into financial options and those sorts of things. There are many of them. I do have some information on that, but that's a whole separate deal. The snapshot below this, I think, is telling. It does not relate to who has and who doesn't have broadband. But what it does show is that there are issues in the School Union 76, which includes Deer Isle Stonington High School, that 20% of the kids that attend those schools need help getting connected to internet at home. In our more local area, if you will, with GSA and Union 93, it's only about 5%. But that doesn't tell you what their service levels are. But to be able to get online, roughly 20% of the kids in the southern part of the peninsula need help and connectivity to it, usually through hotspots or cell phones, to be able to do their schoolwork. Two responses I think I put down here. I usually get a lot of things that people that say we can't afford it. And I don't think that's the right response. I think it's how do we work to make it affordable for all? And I think that's what the intent is of the Peninsula Utility for Broadband, as well as Island Institute and the Maine Broadband Coalition. Next slide. So a couple of terms. Broadband is used in two ways. One is a definition that the FCC has for broadband, which is 25 megabits per second download and 3 megabits per second upload. And that number changes over time. In 2015, it was only 4 and 1. My guess is that within the next couple of years, it's going to change to something like 100 over 100, I hope, which will force some of our current internet service providers to do better than they do today. Broadband typically is related to just having an internet connection or a fast internet connection. But in reality, broadband, if somebody says, I have broadband, I automatically think that they have a connection that's 25 megabits per second down and 3 up or better. But broadband is used in two different ways. The word high speed is also a confusing term because people associate that with the fast speeds. And in reality, what the internet provides you is a certain amount of information in 1 second. They use 1 second as the point of measurement, and it's a capacity of information. It's if you will, it's a basket of information, 25 megabits as an example, that's sent in 1 second. I can give an example of what I have here at my house. I have below 3 megabits per second, which is considerably below that broadband standard. So most people would say I have high-speed connection, but I really don't. I have something above dial-up, but it's not broadband. Capacity is that data. And they do measurements in megabits, which is 1/8 of a megabyte. I don't want to get into too much of that. Megabytes with a big M and a big B are usually define the data that you're sending. The size of a photograph, the size of an email is usually measured in megabytes, but everything that is sent over the internet is referred to as megabits per second. And from the Maine Broadband Action Plan, they define anybody who has service below 25 and 3 as being unserved. And that's very important because that is the breakpoint for a lot of the loans and the grants that are out there is 25 and 3. And that's what we try to do to find out where people are relative to their service capacities. Underserved is anybody basically below 110. So you're underserved if you're below 100. And that's why I think the next step is going to be 100 over 100. So anybody who talks to the FCC, they consider you to have a standard connection that you are served if you have 25 and 3 and above. And my guess is there are quite a few people that might be on this call that are well below that. Next slide. Most people are getting one of the 3 types of wired terrestrial broadband services, either DSL, which is provided typically in this area by somebody like Consolidated Communications. They're getting cable or CATV, which is provided by Spectrum or Charter, as it's the company that owns them, or they're getting fiber optics. The library and all the schools in all of Maine get fiber optic deliveries, but there's also business service that comes and is available to folks who sign up for it via fiber. But nobody else today is getting fiber other than the schools, the libraries, and people who are in businesses that are paying for the connection to it. I'll talk about that in a little bit. In your home, you're typically connected via Wi-Fi to your modem. There is a technology out there that is soon to go away. Premium Choice Broadband was providing it. It was called Wi-Fi. It had much longer service, but it is very unstable and it's not around very often. But the typical Wi-Fi is that in your house. And the last term I'll mention here is something called overbuilding. When a road has spectrum on it, people like the FCC or the USDA are adverse to putting new technologies on top of it and providing grants to it because they're overbuilding and they're putting technology on top of technology, with the exception of the top one, digital subscriber line, DSL, which is very poor service, and they don't mind at all putting fiber on top of that. So next slide. Real quick one. All those lines are all of the fiber that has been put in the oceans since about 1989, 750,000 miles of it. Next slide. There is a very good article in the New York Times. There's a link at the bottom of this slide that shows progressively how various entities, and there are 4 in particular that they call out, have put fiber in the oceans over the last 30 years, roughly. The big ones now are Amazon, Facebook, Google, and Microsoft, and they have a lot of fiber under the oceans. Fiber is not dependent on electrical signals. It's only dependent on light. So it has no distance limits at this point. Next slide. So in the state of Maine, there's something called 3-ring binder. There are 3 concentric rings that are spread throughout the state. They are all on telephone poles that are all dark fiber, that once an internet service provider subscribes to it, they can light that fiber. And that's where we typically get our fiber connections in the state of Maine. Somebody like Consolidated Communications or even Spectrum might connect to the 3-ring binder to be able to get the internet signals that go to your home, though you don't get fiber typically to your house. This was all done several years ago through about $30 to $40 million worth of grants, et cetera. And there was only one exception in this ring, and there's a little spur at the bottom of the slide. You can see towards Deer Isle, and that is a spur that goes to Jackson Labs. They have their own fiber that goes to them through this 3-ring binder. Next slide. Wired space. The only thing I'm going to say about this slide is when you look at a power pole or a utility pole, the upper portion is always power, and where the arrow is pointing down, that space is communications. So in that particular image, 2 lines, 2 wires are for Consolidated Communications, and the one where the arrow is pointing is actually cable TV. And that's what cable TV looks like on the pole. Next slide. This one's a little bit better. So it gets kind of busy on the utility poles. And I can't point with my pointer since Anna is projecting. So at the bottom where the utilities are, if you can see, there's a little orange area near the bottom. Yep, right in there, there's some orange. So if you ever see orange on a wire area at the junction of the wires and the utility pole, that is fiber. And on that plastic cap, it identifies who owns that fiber. The other way you can tell that there's fiber on a wire is there are these 2 little objects, one of which is up a little bit that looks like a snowshoe. Yep, right there. That snowshoe and the one below it also signify fiber on the line. That puts tension in the wires. All of the wiring that's on those utility poles has physical wire in it to hold it structurally on the poles. So if something hits it, it just doesn't break. So when I'm showing you these wires, the fiber on the left and the cable TV on the left as well, the huge difference between the 2 is one is glass and one is copper. One provides all the service to everybody in the area on one copper cable. In fiber, everybody gets a dedicated fiber line so that you're not sharing information. Cable TV shares information. That's why cable TV companies typically can't guarantee a service level. The city of Portland service is going to be worse than it is here in Blue Hill because there aren't as many people sharing. Next slide. So this particular map was provided to me through, at the time, Time Warner. Now it's Spectrum or Charter. The map at the base of it is an attempt to show all of the roads in the Blue Hill area in our town boundaries. The blue on top is where cable is today, Spectrum cable today. And what I did with it is I added where the active RTs are, and there are 4 of those in Blue Hill. I also added where the central office is in Pleasant Street and where the adjacent town RTs or remote terminals are. Those remote terminals receive fiber optic signals from the central office and then relay your DSL service to those who have DSL service through your phone lines. It does not show where all the fiber is in Blue Hill, but basically, if you can imagine, from the central office to each of those boxes, a fiber line. And that is the only cable that is in Blue Hill. Cable TV does not have fiber that serves homes in it. It is copper only. It's not fiber. That's been a misnomer to some. I put two notations on this. There is a remote terminal on Morgan Bay Road. There's also a remote terminal on Pleasant Street that are full, that don't have any more capacity to add new subscribers onto it. What that means is that we actually have people in town who might live right next to one of these boxes, that if they want to sign up for DSL service, they can't get it. So right now we're working on trying to correct that problem. That is common in all of the towns in the area. Remote terminals were built at a certain level and they're full now, most of them. Next slide. The pub concept was to act as a local entity to be able to work with area towns through our mission statement, focusing on communications, advocacy, community continuity through internal and external communications. Some of that was testifying in Augusta when Connect Maine Authority was trying to get more money, about $500,000 to supplement what they get from the state already. We talk to other community groups. We have calls with residents, ISPs, the federal government. I've talked to the US Department of Agriculture about broadband in this area. But approximately 3 years ago, a company called Great Works Internet, GWI, contacted me after an article appeared in the Ellsworth American. This was in August of, I think, 3 or 4 years ago. And they asked if I thought Blue Hill would be interested in broadband. And I said yes. So within about a month or so, we had some surveys done and they submitted an application to the US Department of Agricultural Rural Utilities Service. That's the same folks that brought electricity to Maine. Unfortunately, that first application, even though it did grow from just Blue Hill to include every town on the peninsula, including Deer Island, Stonington, was rejected through the USDA through no fault of GWI. And we weren't able to put the applications back in the system. But today, the towns of Penobscot, Sedgwick, and Brooksville have had their applications submitted to a different program through the USDA. And we're just waiting now to hear if the applications were accepted. If accepted, GWI will get a combination of a loan grant to be able to do fiber to the home in those 3 towns. And that is kind of a jumpstart for the area, since there is no money obligated from any of the towns to be able to do this, nor was there any money that was going to be obligated from any of the towns to do what GWI was doing originally when we were talking about all of the towns on the peninsula. Hopefully that program comes back. We'll see. Next slide. So today there are local town efforts to do things. Brooklyn in particular started off talking to Axiom, and I think they were the very first to talk to Axiom about what the cost would be and whether the town would accept doing fiber to the home in the town. It actually got quoted, came up for a vote, and it did not pass. But what did pass was working with Consolidated Communications to try to bring up service in their town to a minimum of 10 megabits per second and download and 1 megabit per second upload. And that required adding some fiber to support the 2 new RTs they had to put in, upgrading the existing central office and RTs, so that now they're estimating, and it's complete, estimating that about 80% of the locations that had service below 10 and 1 will have access to download speeds of as much as 20 megabits per second. About 37% of the town, somewhere between 10 and 100. That's what they're saying, though it hasn't been tested yet, and that was completed in April. Next slide. At the same time, Stonington is now doing the exact same thing. They're also talking, they had talked to Axiom. It did not pass a town vote for the amount of money that they were going to spend. And they're working with Consolidated Communications to be able to upgrade it so that everybody in their town will have 10-in-1 minimum through DSL. And then they also have some people with Spectrum. Other towns have done things not to that level yet. So Deer Isle obtained a Maine Community Foundation grant of $15,000, which they used to work with a mapping tool called Vetro Fiber with their partner, NeoPartners, and basically did an analysis for everybody in the town, on the peninsula, to show what the costs would be and the implementation for doing fiber to the home in the entire area, which basically confirmed some of our costs. So some of the money that was obtained from Maine Community Foundation was used for other things and got approved through that group, which helped benefit all of the towns getting a better understanding of what their costs might be of doing fiber to the home. Next slide. Penobscot, again, another company, another town that has worked with Axiom. They have not, again, done anything with Axiom, but what they did do through a town vote is set aside $100,000 to set up a technology fund to be able to do future upgrades and enhancements, which may include or could include DSL. They're probably going to wait and see what happens with the application that went through the USDA for GWI. And if that is successful, they will not have to do anything necessarily with that $100,000 because that will be done through GWI. Brooksville also got a grant for internet literacy. They've also done lots of footwork and email communications with residents to see who has and doesn't have service in the area. When I say Sedgwick hasn't, there's no specific local activity. Sedgwick hasn't worked with Axiom and they haven't gone after grants to be able to see what service levels could be improved in the area. Blue Hill, back 3 or 4 years ago, had a very short Axiom broadband study done, developed an analysis of who they thought had and didn't have adequate service. After that report came out, I did a review of that document and submitted a summary of the, I call it the errors in the document itself. And I also did a new analysis of it, which are both available on the Peninsula Utility for Broadband site. It's on the town page. Castine and Idaho, there's no specific activity in those 2 locations as well. Nothing that I wanted to report here. Next slide. So the state of Maine, through the vote in July, approved a $15 million investment for better broadband. That is matched by another $30 million, which amounts to $45 million that could potentially be spent on local efforts in the area. Sometime in, I hope, January, we will find out what the rules and regulations are for doing that. They're working on that right now. Once that is identified, that we may be able to determine how each town will be able to tap into those funds. Every town is a little bit different. Some have Spectrum, some don't. Those with worse service may stand a better chance of being able to get more funding to be able to apply to improve broadband in their areas. Next slide. The next initiative that's coming up and it starts 16 November, Hannah may talk about this here in a little bit, is that Connect Maine Authority through the Maine Broadband Coalition and the Island Institute are doing a speed test mapping initiative. What they're trying to do is reach out to folks to find out what service levels they have in their own residences. And that's to validate some of the areas that we know exists in the FCC mapping data that we have had to deal with for several years. As an example, if if one person in a census block within a town has spectrum service, everybody in that census block is considered to have that same level of service. And what this speed test mapping initiative is trying to do is get a better idea of where the shortfalls are in broadband coverage within towns. And this includes even those people who have no service whatsoever. We think somehow there will be the ability for people to be able to call in to say what service levels they have, should they not have any wired terrestrial internet service providers serving them. This is not intended to identify what HughesNet or cell phone service coverage is in a particular area. It's intended to determine how good your service coverage is through DSL or Spectrum or other wired service providers, which there are none in our area. Next slide. What can you do today? It all depends on what kind of service and who provides it. When I talk to folks and they say they have consolidated service, I typically tell them, ask for bonded service, which is essentially your ability to be able to get 2 phone lines and increase the capacity of your internet service connection. There is no doubling of the service, but it improves it to some degree. The problem today is a lot of our remote terminals are running out of space for being able to do bonded service, but it's worth asking if you don't have it already. One thing that has been a problem in the local area in the past is folks have DSL service and their service drops out for some unknown reason various times of the day. It is typically because your computer, your phone, or otherwise is doing an activity that overloads your Wi-Fi or your computer connection to the internet through the router. So turning off auto update applications or updates will, that includes smartphones, tablets, things like Dropbox or iCloud backups, turning those off during the day and turning them on in the evening so they update when you're not using the internet for critical things like school or work. We've tested that, and it is clearly an identified problem that Consolidated Communications is well aware of, but they don't put it out to folks. So that's one thing I tell people to do. The other thing is to ensure you're getting what you're paying for. I tried to find out just this morning what my service level is on my bill, and typically when you go online, it doesn't tell you what your service level is. You actually have to print out your bill. So knowing what you have and then running a speed test to determine whether you're paying for something above what you're actually being provided. So that is critical. That way it prevents you from paying more than you really need to pay for. The other one is Consolidated Communications. If you have a phone line and you have Consolidated Communications and you have DSL, you should be getting a bill from Consolidated Communications. There are some folks, one at least, that is getting a bill from another service provider for consolidated service, paying more and not able to go on vacation and have his bill reduced. That typically happens with Consolidated. So making sure that you don't use a middleman when you deal with Consolidated Communications for your phone, you should also be dealing with them with your DSL service. That doesn't always happen. One big thing I'll mention is that your technicians are really good folks. They're doing the best they can with what they have to work with. And I know they get yelled at, screamed at, especially when the lines are down and people don't have service. And obviously the wintertime and people losing electricity is a big factor on that. So, but the technicians are trying to do the best they can. So running a speed test, there are 2 of them that I've listed on this slide, and you will get a link to that following the meeting. One is kind of endorsed by the Connect Maine Authority because that sends that data to them. But there's also one that's simply www.speedtest.net, and you can do it via your phone. How to do a speed test, I say, is very important. If you go to the Peninsula Utility for Broadband site, there is part of a page that tells you actually how to do a speed test. You can do it from your phone, but you need to make sure you're doing the speed test using your wired landline service, not your cell phone service. Next slide. How can you help? Communicating with state and local representatives and voicing concerns if you have an issue so that they know that you actually have a problem and where that problem might exist. Let us know if you have a problem that potentially we might be able to help you with or direct you in the right location to try to address that issue. Sending your contact information via email, you can send it to me or you can upload it through our website, but email is desired. That way we can get back to you. And pretty much I'd say any issues you have, especially if you think we might be able to solve those, please contact us. You can't get service, you think something's unusual, you try to sign up for DSL and they say there's none available in your area. Things like that are very informative. I know there's one person on the call who has been in touch with me several months ago, and that's how it was indicated that the DSL box on the Morgan Bay Road was full. So we're working to try to get that fixed. We don't know when that's going to be. It could be next year. It could be the year after that, depending on how much it costs and where it flows into the consolidated communications budget plan. So next slide. And that's the end of that. So my contact information is on there. Please feel free to send me an email. If we need to talk on the phone, that's great. There may be questions I can't answer or easier to answer over the phone. But what I'll also try to do is if I have questions that are provided that I think are important enough that everybody should see the question, I will post that online along with the answer as well too onto the Peninsula Utility for Broadband site. And so everybody knows Maine in 2014 was listed as the 49th state in the country for broadband access. And I think that's about where we are today. Montana, I think, is the last. Our local area here isn't nearly as bad as it is up north, where actually in northern Maine, there is no cable TV at all up there. So, and that's all I have to present on that. So Hannah, do you want to, there you go.
Yeah, so I think we definitely want to make sure we've got lots of time and space for questions. I think we're a small enough group that it's probably going to work best if folks have questions to just go ahead and unmute yourself and shout it out, and Butler can do his best to answer.
Yeah, or even putting your hand up and I'll call you.
Yeah, if it gets a little rowdy, we might have to call. Yeah. And you know, just as a reminder, we're recording this so that this information is accessible after the fact for folks who aren't able to join us today. So if for any reason you're self-conscious about asking your own question live, you can type it into the chat and I can read it out as well. That's another option.
Holly. Unmute.
There you go. So I call consolidated communication every week because I do not have a DSL line, or I'm not, and they just tell me that it's the same story every week. And I just called this morning, and again, my weekly call, and I said, so is there any chance that that I am going to be able to, because I'm self-employed as a piano instructor, and of course I was going along having to come in, and, you know, March hit, and all of a sudden I had to do everything via Zoom. And I probably spent the equivalent, I would say, of about 60 hours trying to work with people, trying to help me get some kind of connection. I'm right across from the Little East Blue Hill Library, and it turned out that I ended up having to go, you know, I'm sort of like limping along with what I can get from there, which isn't great at all.
Who is your provider today? Nothing.
I don't have any.
Okay, so here's a response to your particular location. So you are about a mile away from the closest remote terminal on the Morgan Bay Road. So you should be able to get DSL service, but in your area, there are at least four homes I know of that don't have DSL and can't get DSL, to include Weber's Cove Boatyard. So they use HughesNet. right today. The reason is that the remote terminals are at as built capacity. So what's happened in the local area and throughout Maine is that people have signed up for bonded service. I think that's what the problem has been. And as people have signed up for bonded service, the active electronics in those remote terminals are being used for bonded service using 2 phone lines. And those people who may not have signed up for DSL service prior to the boxes getting full are left out. I know there are 2 people on the call. Stephen is another one. Stephen is out of it. His neighbor directly across the road does not have DSL either. And I know there's a house that is being reconstructed or a building reconstructed, I think $1.5 million. He's not going to have DSL either when it's done. So I know Sarah's aware of it. Louis is aware of it. The Public Utilities Commission's aware of it, and so is Consolidated Communications. They are aware of the issue on the Morgan Bay Road in particular, where people can't get wired internet service on that road. I will say this too, though, is I'm also working on trying to tap into the funds that might become available through the Maine Bond Fund, one of which is trying to get fiber on the East Blue Hill Road, hopefully through East Blue Hill, the village itself and out. And that will come up a little bit later on, working on the plans for that. I've got a cost estimate already, but once we know how we can tap into those funds, I want to try to solve some of the problems they have. What you can do, and this is for everybody to hear, the Consolidated Communications also has a service called Business Fiber. It used to cost about $400 a month for, at that time, it was like a 10 over 10. The cost has gone up. A new resident on the Morgan Bay Road got a quote of $1,000 a month. I don't know what the service level was. It was probably 100 over 100, but $1,000 a month for that service through Consolidated Communications. So Consolidated Communications is not, for fiber, is not an alternative, especially a cost-effective alternative for folks in the local area in the state of Maine to be able to get internet service from over fiber because of the cost. But people are lucky paying $1,000 a month. I do know people who've spent $30,000 just to get connected to Spectrum. So there are big costs involved. We're trying to prevent that problem in the future. Any other questions?
I know that people up the road also that work internationally, and as do I. I mean, I have a couple students. I have one from Australia, and I have one so it's just like you tell them, okay, so you have an hour time, but basically you book them for an hour and 15 minutes with all the glitches in between, So I would love it if, I mean, I go to my son's in Northwest Ohio and I sit down and everything is, it's right there in just south of Toledo. And it's just amazing to me, and the difference here is like, sometimes things just, disappear.
So some of this information is also on the website where these outages are. And so we'll try to address some more information on that. So I don't know your name, Mark. Mute.
Hi, Butler, this is Mari and
Mari. Oh, Mari, I didn't. Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. Mark. I wanted to go right after Holly because Holly, we feel your pain. We live on the east or off the East Blue Road on Woods Point Road. We live about a mile down Woods Point Road, but that's a dirt road that makes a loop up to Quarry Hill Road. And we've got a good handful of neighbors who live both on the East Blue Road, just near Woods Point, and all along down Woods Point and up Quarry Hill Road. There's kind of a whole cadre of us there who are not well connected with internet. We personally have HughesNet, but it's very patchy. It doesn't give us reliable enough service for us to both be doing Zoom meetings that we both need to do for work and school. So I just wanted to piggyback on Holly and say that we're very interested in getting a line on the East Blue Road, and also very interested to see if a line could get run off of that to do that loop, because there's a bunch down there.
So one of my part of that quotation that I got was actually to do fiber from basically where KYC Lane is, which is where Spectrum ends, all the way down, including York Road. That's one of the cost estimates I got. That includes Woods Point. So everybody knows too, Woods Point Road has roughly 20 houses on it. There are also about 70 houses between KYC Lane and to include all of those on York Road before you get to the East Blue Hill Village Bridge. About 70 homes. Most of those homes don't have any wired internet service connection at all. Woods Point and Quarry in particular have no DSL at all. So well aware of that one. GWI is also aware of that. If anybody saw GWI trucks around a couple weeks ago, they were out looking at utility poles as a part of their being proactive about trying to do something in the local area. They were not only on the East Blue Hill Road, but they're also on Falls Bridge Road, who actually has better service. In Blue Hill, and it's in my report as well too, is the East Blue Hill, Morgan Bay roads are the worst ones in Blue Hill in particular. But there are other roads in particular that are far worse than just those roads themselves. Sedgwick, Brooksville, Penobscot in particular have no Spectrum at all in town. But in Blue Hill, of the main roads, East Blue Hill, Morgan Bay roads are the worst in town.
One of the things we did, Butler, to get through the summer was we went and got US Cellular phones and hotspotted because US Cellular has the highest antenna on the tower on Blue Hill Mountain.
Yep,
And that worked really well with high speed. So it worked really well.
It's the only service on the mountain now, and so everybody also knows too. Janelle, I'll get you next. Is that Premium Choice used to be on the Blue Hill Tower? Somebody else forced them lower on the tower, which resulted them losing the capacity to be able to provide any Wi-Fi service from the mountain itself. I believe that the entity that went on the top of the mountain was probably another US Cellular transmitter. Yeah. We have had one new AT&T cell phone tower go in down in Stonington, but I believe it's on top of a water tower, so it doesn't have the height that's needed. But right now, the worst service is Verizon. The next one is the AT&T. So won't go in there. Won't go there.
We won't go there. Well, anyhow, thank you so much for doing this, Butler. Please keep us in the loop. We'd like to, kind of be a representative voice for our whole group of neighbors, one of whom's a public school teacher and really suffered through trying to keep connected to her students this year. So thank you so much for what you're doing.
We would also be willing to pay some of the capital to get the wiring down Woods Point. So
sounds good.
We went to Spectrum and said, well, tell us how much for a line. And they told us they wouldn't even estimate it.
So here's one thing I'll mention, and Janelle, get your question next. So one thing I'll mention is when this survey comes out, which will be around the 16th of November, I'm going to be sending out emails through my Facebook groups, a variety of things, letting people know about it. But everybody who's on this call can help out too by simply taking what gets sent out and forwarding it to people in the area, whether they're in Blue Hill, Sedgwick, Brooksville, or otherwise. And it doesn't matter if they get it 10 times, at least they know it's there. So that's how you can immediately help in this program. And that's going to happen in about 2 weeks. So Janelle?
And Butler, I just want you to know, Sarah also had a comment she wanted to make. So maybe after Janelle, we can go to Sarah Pepworth.
Okay. I'm on the other end of town from the people in Morgan Bay in that area. I'm on Range Road.
Yep.
And Spectrum doesn't come out here because there aren't enough houses per mile for them to run lines. I don't have a dish because I don't watch TV enough to bother with that. What I have is the Wi-Fi from US Cellular. I have a modem. It works pretty well most of the time. Every once in a while I have to go and reset it. Or if they're doing some work up on the tower or something, sometimes it gets messed up. But it works okay. It's not great, but it's affordable. I'd like something that's a little better, but.
Yeah, and you're in a problem area similar to what's going on in the East Blue Hill area, is that you actually have a remote terminal fairly close by, but it's full. And we actually don't know where the service is provided. When you look at those little boxes, the green boxes on the map, We don't know how far they backfeed down each road. Realistically, the one that's on Pleasant Street should be feeding Range Road with DSL service, but it isn't, and we don't know why. So those are some of the things that would get corrected if we were to fix the system that is in place now, where boxes are put in willy-nilly and aren't providing service to folks that need it most. So that's what towns like Stonington and Deer Isle are doing with consolidated service. The ultimate goal is obviously to try to get fiber to the home so that we then no longer have to worry about our broadband connections and being able to get 1 gig to the home, which is possible to do today. And I will say that when you look at Spectrum service, they are now advertising 946 megabits per second download, which is great. Hidden on their website page is what the upload is. So they have 3 levels of upload, 10, 20, and 50. So if you get 1 gig service with cable through Spectrum, if you're lucky enough to get that, the most you can get is 50 upload. Everything that companies like GWI are doing are 250 and 250 or 500 or 500. Islesboro gets 1 gig to the home on the island of Islesboro, both down and upload. So quite a bit different. You can upload your entire computer's memory in a couple seconds, which is great. Sarah, did answer, Janelle, did that answer?
Yeah, I didn't really have a question. And am I going to be able to participate in that speed test thing? Because I don't have a
Yes, so somehow you will be able to get we'll make sure there's a phone number provided, so people who don't have wired service will be able to call in to identify where the shortages are. But I'm also aware of where many of those are in Blue Hill, like Woods Point Road. As in particular. But now I'm more aware of isolated spots. Stephen's in an isolated spot because he doesn't have service, even though he's half a mile, 3/4 of a mile from the remote terminal. And they should be connecting him within 3 miles, but they're not because they're full. But yes, you will be able to participate.
Okay.
Sarah.
Thanks, Butler. And thanks, Hannah, for running this. I just wanted to introduce myself to those who don't know me, that I'm Sarah Pebworth, and I'm one of the state representatives that Butler said to contact if you have an issue. And sadly, many of you are familiar to me for having had issues. Butler, thank you so much for being the broadband champion of this area. At the state level, for so many reasons, and now for so many years, we have been pushing hard. People might say we can't afford it, but we know that we can't afford not to. And Senator Lucchini and I are both really pushing hard, but now it's not a partisan issue. It's statewide. We understand it from the educational viewpoint, from the health viewpoint, from business viewpoint. We want to bring people in from urban areas to work remotely here, and we need to make that possible. So anyway, I just wanted to say we are working as hard as we can, and this really is a top issue, unforgivable. So thank you, Butler, for being that on the road, on the pole, voice and pressure for this area. It's really appreciated.
And I'll also add two things. One is please let selectmen know that you've got issues and what those are and what are they going to do to try to help fix things. I think that's one place to start. I know Stephen has done that. I want to keep bringing you up, but he wrote 3 letters, 1 to each selectman. I know Louis got another one, and I know that they're aware of it, but I think making sure people understand what it is that you don't have and what the problem is. I am more than happy, like I said, to spend time on the phone with you or otherwise. I think I spent about 3 hours on the phone with one particular resident in East Blue Hill who was having problems not only with his DSL, but who his provider was. So that's why I brought up that service level thing. We're trying to work that issue. So if somebody is got DSL service and it's not from Consolidated Communications, I would love to know. This is a question that I have, and it's being addressed through Connect Maine Authority to find out whether something incorrect is happening in the area. You shouldn't be having to pay more for that DSL service than what Consolidated is charging, as an example, and people are. So anyway, any other questions? Nothing? Okay.
Silence. I'm not seeing anything come through in the chat. Someone in the chat did ask, if we can share the link to this recording, which I'll definitely do. I'll email that out to everybody who was registered for today's event, whether or not they were able to attend live. So you should be getting that. And I think, Butler, if it's okay with you, I can attach your slides to that email as well. So everyone has all that information in writing.
If you do that, would be great. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to post the same information to the pub website. It'll be on probably the first page of it. There is, so for folks that are in Blue Hill, I think most people on this call are Blue Hill folks. Funny how that works out. There is a town page on that pub website that I created specifically to address Blue Hill's issues. A lot of the information, as well as a photo of what the remote terminals look like, those are also on the site as well as in the report I provided, so that if you're driving down the road, please pay attention when you're driving. You can actually identify where those remote terminals are. You can actually look and see if something's on a pole, like cable TV. They have those funny dips in them on either side of the pole or on one side. That is always what cable TV looks like. But also, if you see orange, you'll know that there is fiber on that pole. Not necessarily that it goes to houses, but that probably is serving remote terminals. And that's what they are. The fiber in Blue Hill is really intended to serve the remote terminals, get fiber to the central office, to also go up Blue Hill Mountain for our cell phone service, because that's where our cell phone service is actually coming from and going out through, is through those transmitters on the mountain, but it goes through fiber cable coming back down and going up it as well. So that's out there. But all that stuff is posted to that site. So if you haven't looked at it, please peruse. Okay.
Holly, did you have one more question?
Yeah. They tell me that the East Blue Hill Library and all libraries have what's called a T1 line. What does that mean?
So, T1 was a term that was used years ago for basically service that was at the 1 megabit per second level, roughly. So it's an old term. It does not apply, or shouldn't apply, to any library or school in the state of Maine, because every one of them should have fiber to the home, and that term T1 should not apply. T1 is like using the term Kodak or Xerox. People talk about Kodak moments. Well, now they're digitized, and Kodak's not doing photos anymore. Or Xerox. A lot of other companies do it too. So T1 people associate with fast internet, but that was fast internet 20 years ago, the T1 lines. So to tell you the truth, that the East Blue Hill Library should have fiber to it. I know the fiber goes down Cove Road and I think goes right into the building. So you should have fiber in that building. What level of service, I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, well, thanks very much for letting me yap.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Thank you, Butler.
Yeah.
And thank you everyone for being here. As we wrap up, if anyone wants to unmute yourself. Oh wait, David, I see David has his virtual hand raised before we end. David, if you want to unmute yourself, you're welcome to ask a question.
David Mitchell, okay. David?
You'll have to unmute yourself,
Yeah,
David. There you go.
Okay.
Oh, now we're back muted again.
Try unmuting again. Okay, good, talk.
I have a background question about why it is that the USDA happens to be in charge of this whole area in the first place. What's it have to do with agriculture?
Well, so here's the big thing is, so two things. FCC and the USDA are probably the two largest entities in the US government that do stuff with broadband. The USDA in particular has an entity called the Rural Utilities Service, and they provided power to the US, especially rural areas, during the Depression and after that, subsequent to it. The USDA is also highly involved in rural areas, and we are in a rural area. So the USDA has kind of been assigned that tasking for broadband connectivity to farms and rural communities, and we live in one of those. And that's why USDA is involved in broadband for our rural area. And the grants that are provided and the loans that are provided are only for rural communities like ours, or even more rural. That's why they're involved. That answer that question?
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. Any other final questions before we wrap up here? All right. Well, I'd like to invite everyone to unmute yourself and give a round of applause for Butler and yell out your thanks and let him know you appreciate his time, as I definitely do. Yay!
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Butler.
Thank you, Butler.
Thank you.
Thank you, Butler.
Thank you, Butler. Thank you, Hannah.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Everybody have a great evening.
You too.
You too. Yep.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.